standing in Cincinnati. It really is a beautiful city. I'm going to start out, I like to start out with a joke. I think it's a great way to start a talk. This is not my story, this is a story that was told to me, but there was this gentleman, ran a little country store, and in this country store there'd be a Cracker Barrel and there'd be guys sitting around playing checkers and stuff like this, and he was a very devout man. So every time he'd ring up the cash register, he'd quote a Bible verse. So little boy comes in, wants some penny candy, he gives him the penny candy and he walks over to the register and he cling, suffer little children to come unto me. Everybody's like, yeah. Guy comes in one time, I'm getting some flowers for my mother. So he sells them the flowers, goes over to the register, ching, honor thy mother and thy father. Great. So this big horse trailer pulls up one time, and this guy comes in and says, I need a blanket for my horse, championship thoroughbred horse, I gotta have a blanket for you. You sell horse blankets? He says, oh sure, yeah. Goes out in the back, he gets one, brings it out front, says, $10. And the guy says, no, you don't understand. This is a thoroughbred championship horse. I'm not putting a $10 blanket on this horse. He says, you got any others? And he says, oh, sure, just a minute. And he goes out in the back, and everyone sitting there knew he only had one kind of horse blanket. It was just different colors. So he brings out a different color, and he says, oh, that would be $25. He says, look, you're really not listening to me. He says, I really want your very best blanket. He says, sure, no problem. Goes back out in the back, gets another color of the same blanket. That'll be $150. He says, now you're talking. Here you go. Gives him the money. And the guys sitting around the Cracker Barrel are looking at him like, what is he going to say? He walks over to the cash register. He rings it up and he says, he was a stranger and I took him in. It actually is a good joke for this talk too, because one of the things that the Elixir community, that Jose Valim has been very much in favor of, is trying to be inclusive. And building hex packages is another example of how he's inclusive. There was some discussion about, like, some people are concerned or maybe a little too inclusive and letting people build hex packages, but that's another conversation. So just real quick, if you have a cell phone, please silence it. Just don't want anybody to be interrupting. And if you have questions, I prefer that people ask questions when they think of them. I would ask you to raise your hand so we're not talking over each other, but I prefer you ask them like right when it occurs to you rather than waiting until the end of the talk, and I'll leave some time at the end of the talk for people to ask questions too. Okay? So we're going to discuss a little bit on Elixir. I think a lot of the people here probably know a bit about Elixir, but I'm going to do a little level setting and talk a little about what Elixir is and what we do with it. Then we're going to discuss what do we want in Common Code. Common Code being like a package. What kinds of properties do we want to see there? And then finally, we'll talk about how Elixir implements what we want in Common Code. So Elixir, if you're not aware, is built on the same virtual machine that Erlang is built on. It's called the Beam. I think it's really helpful when you're trying to understand a language and it's, raison d'etre, to understand why they created it, what they were looking for. Like C was created to build an operating system. It was created to build Unix. And because of that, they made it real loosey-goosey. It's weakly typed. You can do a lot of bit fiddling. They needed that stuff. Java, C#, built to allow people to do object-oriented programming and also to get rid of this manual memory management that we had in C and C++. So it's a lot easier for people to code stuff with Java and C# because they didn't have to worry about, allocate and free and all this nonsense. Well, Erlang was built by gentlemen at Ericsson Phone. I think that's right, Ericsson Phone. They built it for phone switches. The other alternative they had was to write all this stuff in C, and they didn't really like that thought. So a lot of the design decisions that were made in building Erlang were made with this idea of phone switches in mind. If you're running a phone company and you've got a phone switch and somebody says, hey, I've got 100 customers on this phone switch now, I need to move up to 500 customers because I got people who are willing to pay me, and you say, well, I got to rewrite the software, that's not really going to work. They're going to be really upset by that. So scale was an issue for them right from the start. And because they had this practical issue of scaling things up, they kind of invented a model that's very much like the actor model, but they didn't know anything about the actor model at the time. It was just a practical consideration for them. Fault tolerance, also very important. Again, you think of a phone like you think of your electricity. You don't think of it ever going down. You want it on all the time. So again, this informed how Erlang was designed. It informed that Erlang has this ability to recover from failures pretty easily. So I can't give you a list of things that scale. I don't have like this scales, this scales, this scales. I can tell you what does not scale though. And these are two things that are very important, and again, in understanding Erlang and Elixir both. Shared stuff will not scale. Even at the level of functional programming, shared variables don't scale. Because the more execution context, and I say execution context generically like threads or processes or whatever, the more things you got going after that one little bit of data in memory, the more likelihood there is someone's going to forget to lock it before they read it or write it, and it's going to cause a problem. And it's going to be a really hard to find problem because you've got all these different processes going after it. Shared stuff will not scale. Now, at some point, you're going to have to share something. You have to have a database or something like this, but a lot of databases are already designed to handle that sharing. They're already designed so that that they're made in that way. Erlang takes this nothing is shared idea to a very far extreme in that when you take the general unit of computation in Erlang is a process, and it's not like an OS process, it's an Erlang VM process, very lightweight. But their basic unit of computation is a process, and when you take and pass data from one process to another, you are literally passing it. It is deep copied. It's not like I'm saying, okay, I got this data in process A and I'm going to pass a pointer to process B. No, I'm passing the entire thing deep copied. Now, if you're like me, probably the first time you hear it, you think that can't be efficient. It's got to be terribly slow. But actually, it has the benefit of when process B is done with this data, it can just wipe it out. It doesn't have to worry about hanging on to it. Once it's done, it's gone. If process B crashes, again, I don't have to worry about process A being screwed up because I don't have any data in common between the two of them. Nothing's shared. There is some stuff that is shared, just binaries, large binaries, which in the case of Erlang is strings, really large strings, but avoid that and you're not sharing anything. And it's probably not so great to say nothing is shared because there's that one little exception, but for the most part you can think of nothing is shared. The other thing that will not scale are overly fragile processes. If I have two processes sitting on two different machines, by definition, networks are unreliable. Guaranteed, some point in the future, your network will be unavailable for some reason. You should build your code such that it accounts for that and says, okay, if this network is unavailable, I can continue on. Either I log something or I keep retrying until the network is available again, or I do something that's not fragile. Try catch, which a lot of us have gotten used to because of Java and C# and other object-oriented languages, is really not a great approach. Because a lot of times the try catch is like, I don't know what to do with this when I get it. I caught this error, I don't know what to do with it, I'll log it and then exit the program. Erlang takes this idea, what they call let it crash, which is basically write the happy path, and then if it crashes, you log it, and then you build your application as a series of supervisor trees, where one process is watching other processes, and if they come down for some reason, you can restart the process, or you can or do other things with it, but it's basically, you get the happy path in the code and it's a lot easier to understand and it scales better. Now, I don't have it up here, but Elixir, in addition to these things I'm telling you about Erlang, adds was telling James earlier, people think of Elixir as Ruby on Erlang, and it's not quite that simple. It adds the closure story of macros. They took and borrowed Clojure's macro facilities, and it also adds Ruby syntax. So, but it's more appropriate to say that Elixir is kind of the love child of Ruby, Erlang, and Clojure than say it's just Ruby on Erlang. So now I'm going to talk about this package I built. A gentleman named Paul Schoenfeld, real nice guy, helped me when I was getting started with Elixir. And Elixir is like a lot of open source languages. There's not a lot of support for it on Windows. If you want to do it on Windows, you're kind of on your own. And Paul was nice enough to help me out with some of this stuff. And he makes a package called EXRM, which is the Elixir Release Manager. And several months later, he said to me, "Hey, Onorio, you work on Windows, right?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Okay, I've been trying to get EXRM to work on Windows, so I can build a release on Windows and give it out to somebody on Windows. And would you take a look at it?" And I said, "Of course." I started looking at it, and most of the shell scripts they had built weren't working. And the reason most of these shell scripts weren't working was because on Windows, the standard place to put program files is program space files, which is fine if you're using like the Windows Explorer because you don't care about spaces and names. But if you're doing a shell script, that becomes a big problem. The standard answer that the Windows folks will give you is, just put double quotes around it, which again is fine, except if you have double quotes in the command line you're passing, that becomes a problem. And one of the first things his batch files were doing, and he borrowed them from somebody else, was trying to figure out the version of Erlang that was present. And that was passing a command line, an Erlang command line, to be executed by the Erlang interpreter, and it had quotes in it. And I said, "This is for the birds. I don't like this. This is dumb. It's fragile." And so what I did was I said, okay, I'm going to change this to where everything is using the 8.3 version of these names. Which then you don't have to worry about this nonsense of I've got to quote it or I don't have to quote it. If it's 8.3, everything's fine. So by doing that, I managed to get these EXRM scripts working for the first time ever, actually. They're still not exactly where we want them to be, but they're a lot better than what they were. So to me, this is something that I said, I know there's a few other people who like to try and work with Elixir on Windows, and this is a problem for them too. So I thought, well, I'll do a little package to take, and you pass me a directory name, and I'll pass you back the 8.3 version. So that's what motivated this package I'm talking about right now, which is called Pragmatic, because it was like, to me, it was a pragmatic solution for this problem of Windows file names and 8.3 and all that. So what does good common code look like? One thing, you want it to be secure. People don't tend to think about it. The Windows people don't think about NuGet. The other people on other platforms, Ruby, don't think about gems. But it wouldn't be that difficult if you don't have any security to take an existing package, package it up with some malicious code, put it back upon this server, and people would just download it and they wouldn't check it. Every Unix package in the world will tell you, hey, check the key, make sure this has not been tampered with. But how many people actually do that? I mean, really. So making things secure is a good idea when you're talking about common code. Especially, like I say, from the standpoint of somebody not being able to slip in and put a different version of your code on the server that other people are going to download. You want it well documented. Elixir borrowed some other ideas from Python as far as this thing called doctests, which I'll get into a bit more in a minute. But they really emphasize and have emphasized over and over again that documentation needs to be a first-class citizen also. So they really want to give you the tooling to build good documentation for what you're building. This is one of the common complaints about Erlang, by the way, is that Erlang is not well documented. I don't know, I don't find the Erlang documentation that hard to read, but I haven't had to read a lot of it either, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to give an opinion on that subject. You want to make sure it's well tested. It's common code. You don't want to pull down a package from some common source and have it fall over at the first thing that goes wrong. So you as a publisher of this common code, you want to make sure it's well tested. You want to version it, because if somebody says, hey, I've got a problem with your code, if you don't have a version number on it, how can you tell? I mean, so, okay, you've got version 1.1 and I've got up to version 3.1 out on the server. Why don't you try 3.1 and see if the problem is still there, and then we'll talk. So you want to be able to version things easily. And finally, you got to make it really easy to install it and easy to uninstall it. Because again, that encourages people to use your package. Because if it's really hard to install, I got to build this and do that and do the other thing, people will avoid it. It's like over the years have helped with interviews. One of my favorite questions to ask candidates coming in is, what is the most important quality of a unit test? I have never had anybody give me the right answer, although I've got some good answers, but not the right one. The right answer is the most important quality of a unit test is it has to be easy to run. It doesn't matter what you're testing or what you're doing with it. If it's not easy to run, developers are going to avoid running it, and it won't do you any good. You 100% code coverage, and no one runs it, not doing you a darn bit of good. So ease of install and uninstall is the same thing. If it's not easy to install, not easy to get rid of when I want to get rid of it, I'm going to avoid it. And it will get a reputation that people will say, oh, I don't want to touch that because it's going to be hard to get rid of. So you want to make it easy to install and uninstall, and the tooling makes that happen. So security. What you'll do is you'll register a Hex user, and that will give you like an API key. Like, I think it's a PGP type key. I could be wrong. I don't know all the details, honestly. And that'll put this ID on your machine, and then when you're ready to push things, it can see the keys on your machine. The other thing that goes along with it, and a lot of this tooling is built right into Mix, which is like, for those of you familiar with Clojure, it's like Lineagen. I think the same person who did Lineagen for Clojure did Mix also, or helped with it. A lot of these commands are built into Mix. The other thing is, if you decide you want to work on a different machine, obviously you need to get that API key to this other machine, so you can do a Mix Hex user auth, which will take it from one to the other. Or I don't think it actually takes it off the first one, it just adds it to the second one. And this is just a little screenshot of what that looks like. Documented. To me, one of the best reasons that wikis, when they were really hot, where they were succeeding so well, is because they made it really easy to change things. That was a good thing and also a drawback, but people will follow the path of least resistance. If you make it hard for people to change things, guess what? Things won't get changed. So I was telling somebody, to me, this is one of the best things about functional programming, because whether you say, I've got to have everything immutable, or I just want it default immutable, people aren't going to fight defaults. They're not going to sit there. I've got better things to do with my time than sit there. How many years have people been advised in C++, mark constant on things, pass by reference, don't pass by, or pass by value, I'm sorry, because that way you don't accidentally change something, and they don't do it because it's not the default. So you want to give somebody the path of least resistance on adding documentation, which Elixir does. Make it easy to create, easy to revise, again, because people are more likely to actually do it. And it does you no good to have wonderful documentation if no one actually prepares it. Have all the knowledge up in some developer's head and it never gets written out, does you no good. And of course, you want to ensure your documents are up to date. So this is an example of my code. This is the actual markdown in the comments. And then this is how it renders on the Hex website. Now there's a reason I show you this particular example. As I was saying earlier, one of the ideas they borrowed from Python of documentation test. It looks for that string, that IEX greater than. If it sees that string in the markdown, it says, okay, this is a test. It takes everything from that greater than on, pulls it out, runs it, and then checks the result against the next line. If it does not match, it fails. You don't have to do anything special other than put this code into your markdown in order to get this. You just do mixed test and it works just fine. As a matter of fact, I'll show you in just a second here. Let me see, was it... See, this is the great annoyance of PowerPoint for me. Okay, so there's my test, just ran it, 5 tests. And by the way, all my tests on this are documentation tests. I don't have separate unit tests, I didn't need them. It was pretty simple, I could just do it all via documentation test. So if I open up, my Emacs, I like to use Emacs. Others use Atom and stuff like that. So if I, right now I've got that there with program ~1, which is the right thing on my machine. So if I change that and say now it should actually give you back ~1. Where's the tilde on this keyboard? And then I run the test again. I've got to save it. I run the test again. Ta-da, test failure. It says, you told me I should get ~1. I actually got ~1. It's that simple. And that way, my samples and my code that I share with other people, I guarantee they're always up to date. Guaranteed. Because every time I run this test, that gets tested. So to me, that alone is one of the most awesome features about using Hex to build, using the package manager. It's not part of the package manager, actually. It's just one of the great things in Elixir. Yes?
So that test is dependent on the specifics of your machine. Is there a way that you can leave it out of the build system so that it won't try to run tests that you don't want it to run like that?
That's an excellent question. There are ways to tag test. I don't know about documentation test. There are ways definitely to tag test so they won't get run. Or you can tag them and say run every test that's tagged with so-and-so. That's an excellent question. Yeah, when I did this, I tried to figure out some more generic way to do this because even program files is not guaranteed to always be program ~1. I just, at a point, I just said to myself, well, I'm just going to have to trust it. It works on my machine, so, which is not a great answer, but it's about the best I could do. So, but that's an excellent question. I wish I had a better answer for you.
So it looks like in the X unit docs, it says we also allow you to skip some functions from the following doctest.
Oh, do they? Okay.
See the documentation for more input, but unfortunately there's a
I have to tell them to make the change on that doc.
yeah, actually.
I tell you, unlike some other open source projects I've ever seen, they're really, if somebody submits a change, they, like somebody changes documentation, they'll pull it right in. They're really pretty good about that kind of stuff. They're pretty friendly about that kind of thing. Like I say, they really are kind of, he was a stranger and I took him in type of thing. Oh, that would be why it's not going forward. Okay. So I just showed you how we can do unit test, and there's also a package for Elixir called XUnit, which lets you do a more traditional type of unit test. To me, what I did, the doc tests were plenty. That was, that's more and more interested anyway, is making sure that things are documented for people who want to use my package, and making sure that that documentation doesn't get out of date. Like I've changed some implementation, I forgot to change my documentation. That's not going to help. The other thing is, Erlang and Elixir are dynamically typed, like Python, like Ruby. So you don't really have that compile time type checking to help you make sure you don't accidentally pass an integer when you should be passing a float or things like this. But the Erlang folks came up with this tool called Dialyzer. And if I can pull this back over to the other screen again, that will allow you to do some of this checking. You see this line, I'm sorry, I apologize, it's probably a little bit small to see. That @ spec there is a type declaration for this function that follows. User is admin. I added some other functions to this library after I published it. User is admin should return a Boolean. It will tell you if there's a possibility of returning anything on a Boolean. It's not, I don't believe that it's completely bulletproof, but it's a heck of a lot better than having no way of checking that you're getting back what you expect to get back. This is part of the reason I decided to do this talk in the first place, because when I was doing this, I hadn't used the type spec stuff before. And it really, and the doc test too for that matter, I hadn't really had an occasion to use them, so it really, a lot of things that I've been reading about in Elixir kind of came into focus. And it's like, oh, okay, so this is how this fits in. This is a great idea. So like I say, that's part of the reason I decided to even do this talk in the first place, was to share some of these ideas that all kind of work together to get a real nice interface for shared code. Okay. We proceed. Okay. Okay. Version. Obviously, you need to be able to identify version numbers for issues. You want the user to always pick up the most recent version, but also be able to go back to prior versions if they need to. And they added, I don't know if this is something that they borrowed from another language, maybe some of you guys might know, they added this idea of a tilde greater than, which is a very fascinating little way to notate versioning. Tilde greater than, like if I say tilde greater than 1.0, if somebody comes out with a 1.1, I'll pick that up automatically. If they come out with a 2.0, I won't. If I say tilde greater than 1.1.0, then if somebody comes out with 1.1.1, I'll pick that up. If they come out with 1.2, I will not. So it's kind of like that last digit that you haven't specified. It becomes like, okay, it's okay to pick up this next version. And I should be very careful about saying that. It doesn't automatically pick up anything. It will tell you, though, okay, you've got 1.2 here. There's now 1.2.1. Do you want to get that? They lock down the versions. It would be very bad if it just pulled down versions of software for you without asking you. So, again, in this... Do you guys know where that came from? I've no... Okay. Okay, maybe maybe there's something they just took straight across from Ruby.
It's been so long since I've used Gems
I was just going to show you guys a little something else as far as that versioning goes. Let me see if I can get it up here. Sorry, not what I intended to do. No. Yes. Okay, that's a different keystroke than I thought it would it be. Let me see if I can figure out how to pull this up here. Sorry for the delay. This is a little bit off script, and I should never do things off script when I'm doing a talk, but it seems worthwhile.
We're nice. Yeah.
I appreciate that. You know, you guys can cut my pay if you want. Okay. There we are. Okay. Except I want to do that and pull that over there. And then maximize. Okay, what I wanted to show you guys, which to me is kind of interesting again, You'll notice on these two dependencies, and this was not something I had originally. This was something that Eric Meadows Johnson, who's the gentleman who I think he started Mix, and he also runs the Hex.pm package manager, pointed out to me. I wanted to build my documentation. I needed Xdocs to do it, and Xdocs needs a markdown tool installed also, so I picked Earmark. But I originally had not put in this only development thing. So when I pushed it to the Hex library, it said, okay, there's a dependency on Xdocs and Earmark. And Eric said to me, hey, do you really need Xdocs and Earmark? And I said, well, no, not really. I just need to build documentation. He said, okay, well then, mark it as only doc or only dev. In this case, I marked it only dev. But what happens is it's smart enough when it sees this dependency here, when you go to push to Hex, it'll say, hey, this dependency isn't going to get pushed. Did you mean to do that? So that way I don't get Xdocs pushed up there as a dependency, so it's not really a dependency. That to me, again, is one of those little touches that, you know, I guess when you do this stuff enough, you figure these things out. But that to me is one of those great little touches they've done to make these things work really nicely. Okay. And where is my mouse? Okay. Finally, ease of install and uninstall. This is like one of the nicest things about Hex.pm, is that I just go in there and add the dependency line that I just showed you for Xdocs and Earmark. It pulls down, you know, the correct version for that project, puts it in that project, and that's it. There are ways to put that correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, because I may be remembering wrong. In Elixir, there are ways to put a dependency for multiple projects, like a shared area, I think. But the default is to only put it on the project you specify it on, which again also makes it really easy to uninstall, because when you get rid of that project, it's gone. So if I say, okay, now I don't want Onorio's pragmatic project package anymore, I wipe out the project, it's gone. All traces of it are gone. So I don't have to worry about it, you know, bleeding into some other thing. So to me, that answers the, you know, it's easy to install, it's easy to uninstall. Am I thinking right?
Well, there's archives, right? So you can install a project globally to your system that has like a binary that you use, but I don't know if there's like a global hex package installed, because none of that would exist outside of the next project, right? So there's
Right, true. True. Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, if you're interested, hit me up either at Twitter here or on my email address, and I'll see if I can find you an answer if you really want to know. So, finally, like I said, this talk didn't take as long as I thought it would, but it didn't actually take me that long to build a Hex package either. The documentation that's there is pretty good. It's really pretty easy to follow as far as building a package. You want to use the Hex.pm stuff that's built into Mix. I liked using Dialyzer to get a little better feel, a little more confidence that what I had would work right. The semantic versioning that they practice allows you to use that tilde greater than to be notified when there's a newer version that you might be interested in fixing. So I really do think they've got a lot of things right. I don't know. I never worked with Ruby Gems, so I'm not sure how much of this was there in Ruby Gems and just kind of brought it forward. But having worked on other package management systems like NuGet, this is wonderful. This is so much better than what I've seen on NuGet. So, were there any questions?